exists, but it's all underground. And so it's definitely very hard for an institution to kind of grow when the persecution gets that fierce. But even in that moment, I think you're seeing in China the gospel spreading, because the more persecution, I think the gospel tends to thrive in that environment.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a question, please come and stand over here and get the microphone to question our panelists this afternoon. Okay? I'll ask a question to our friends from Rafiki. What have been the greatest hindrances to people understanding classical Christian education here in Zambia? What do you think the greatest hindrances have been?
Go ahead.
I think one of the main hindrances is it's just so new, very new, the classical. The Christian part, people think, well, I grew up in a Christian home, my teacher is a Christian, she says, he says, therefore this is a Christian education. I think oftentimes it's a patina of Christianity laid on top of something else. It's very hard for the parents who want their children in our school, not like a government school. They want something that looks like our school, but it's not always easy for them to understand the distinctives, like Dr. Merkle was describing, the basic distinctives and how we are different. So I think part of it is educating the community and the parents to know the value of this, so that when their child needs to work on their vocabulary grades or their classical writing grades, the parents are needing to understand education is more than just getting your 5 O-levels and moving them past that to the value of education beyond. And that a Christian education is gospel-centered, the entire gospel. One of the things we do with our Bible lessons is that the day students in grade 3 and above get a home discussion page every week. A summary of the Bible lesson, the doctrine. It's always bringing up the gospel and the hymn for the week. So we're hoping that through that, the parents who are not attending partner churches, but local churches, will be hearing more of the gospel. And as we educate them more and more to understand the value of and what is classical education.
Thank you. Just a reminder that this applies to any of the sessions that we've heard this week as well. So if you have questions about this whole week, feel free to stand up and ask those questions. All right, I have one more question here that I can ask. Dr. Merkle, when you're building a classical Christian school and college, what are some of the ways that you help enhance the kind of the faculty and staff and student culture at the school? Like, what are some of the things that are maybe set up, whether it be programs or informal even? What kind of helps the culture to build around a classical Christian education, whether it be a college or a primary, secondary school?
I think the single most important extracurricular activity has got to be the fact that you're all worshiping on Sunday morning. I think that the fact that your fellowship ought to all really circle around the fact that you're saints who are worshiping God on Sunday, and you're here really to prepare yourself to do that really well. I think that's probably the single biggest thing, is that you guys be worshiping on Sunday. Not necessarily all at the same church. Like in Moscow, we're all at different churches, but we're all getting ready for that, and then that really just shapes the rest of the culture. I do think that Where I live, we're blessed by the fact that it's a small town and it's a very walkable town. Students all just walk everywhere and they live pretty close. And that means that on any given evening, they're gathered all over at each other's houses, studying or pretending to study. They're actually just more fellowshipping and enjoying each other. Our main street has a number of coffee shops that they all gather at to study. So there's quite a lot of gathering together in the evenings. But one of the things I challenge the students to do is, again, connecting with that idea that this is really about preparing yourself to worship God. I challenge the students on a Friday evening, if you're all gathered together, enjoying each other, having fun, whatever, could you end the evening together singing hymns and psalms together? Could you end your time of fellowship with one another singing 3 or 4 songs together? And if let's say a group of you students were gathered together on a Friday night, just enjoying each other, and then one of you said, "Hey, let's sing a couple hymns now." If one of you said that, would you all feel like, "Oh, that is a really weird and awkward thing to ask us to do now"? I mean, we've been doing this evening to suddenly start singing praise to God. That would not fit at all. I think if that's the case, you ought to think about how you spend your social life together. But if you could easily enjoy one another, fellowship and whatnot, and then you could just close with a few hymns, and it would fit, and it would feel like an appropriate way to just end the evening, then that tells you that your social life is glorifying to God. That all of this was actually something that could be offered up to Him. And I think that fellowship around the school is really extremely important. That culture that you guys are building is really important for this education, because what will happen is you know the difference between studying for an exam where you believe the teacher wants you to say. Okay, you're just writing down what the teacher wants you to say, versus a class where you're actually learning real true things that you want to know and that you believe. In the first one, your life and what you're doing in school are two separate things. You're just taking the classes so you can get the piece of paper. Your life and the school are one thing. This is something you're doing because you really believe it. And your social life, if it's the overflow of this school, then that tells you you're getting a true education that's really shaping your heart. And I think it's really important to make sure that that's what you're doing, because that's what makes this into something that really changes the culture around you.
Thank you, Dr. Merkle. I see we have a question here from the audience, so you can go ahead.
You had talked in one of your previous sessions about the importance of fathers taking their responsible roles. What does it look like, both in the general context and in the Zambian context? How do you help parents take responsibility for that instead of subcontracting that to, Rafiki, which is doing a great job, but you know what I mean? So how do you help parents take responsibility and help them do their job?
So my kids go to a classical Christian school, and they all have gone through this school. And at the same time, I believe that it's my job as a father to be responsible for the education my kids are receiving. And it would be really easy for me to just send them to that school and just put it all on that school, and then not have to worry about it at all. But at the school that my kids go to, at the very beginning of the school year, all the parents have to come in, and the principal lines up all the faculty in front of all the parents who are sitting there. So you would be all the parents sitting there, and the school faculty would be all lined up here. The principal will line them all up, and he'll say, "We are your servants. We work for you. You are the parents. You are in charge of your children. We're not in charge of them. We're not the boss of them. We are simply hired by you to perform this job. So we are your servants." And the reason he does that is because he wants us to all be close to our teachers, to give feedback to the teachers. I think it's just really important for parents to be involved in the education of their children, to really own it and believe that this is their responsibility. For us and my family, it meant the whole time my kids were going through school, Becca, my wife, actually worked for the school. She taught there. So she was in their classes. She told me what was going on. She told me when there was a problem, and she kept me informed. I tried to be as present as possible. I coached the high school lacrosse team. I don't know if you've ever seen the sport lacrosse. It's a peculiar sport that we play. It's very violent. You get to hit each other with sticks. But I was the coach for my son's lacrosse team. So for all the way from junior high through high school, I would coach it. And one of the reasons I did that is I wanted to be present. I wanted to see the friends they were making. I wanted to be able to give input into their lives. But I do think it's really important that if you have your kids in the school does not become a replacement for the authority and the presence of a parent. A good school is a tool that a parent uses to be a good parent and raise that children up the way they're supposed to.
All right, so I have a question from someone online. It says, in a country that has standardized education, like Zambia, where the education authorities want us to follow the same curriculum, whether it's agriculture or medicine, how can we adopt the Paideia type education or that approach and blend it, or do we need to blend it, or what do we do with that when it comes to the fact that we have this government down, standardized kind of control of the curriculum and education approach? How do we kind of work that out as Christians?
Do you want me to grab that?
First,
Okay.
I think, yes.
I bet they have a lot to say on that, but I would just say, in America, even at the college level, we have the same thing. For accreditation, I have certain standards that I have to meet in order to grant the degree, and we'll have teams that visit and do regular assessment to monitor that we're actually meeting it. So that's something that we have to go through as well. At least in the American context, it's still quite adaptable. So they'll give you a general goal, but usually you can find a way to achieve your end while still being able to tick the box that they want to tick you. I think you probably could give more specific examples in the Zambian context like that.
Well, this is a question we have to face very much front on. We take the exam seriously. As Tom mentioned, one of the goals of Rafiki, well, the first one is to help people know God, and the second one is to raise the standard of living. Well, how do you do that? Well, you get a job, and to get a job you need a certificate, a diploma, a degree. What do you need to get that? You need your 5.0 levels. This is just reality. So we take it seriously, but we do not spend weeks and weeks or months and months memorizing past papers. We have a system. We take our classical curriculum written by Rafiki, and it has the topics. Let's just pick grade 8, math. And then we have the Zambian syllabus, and the teachers compare. And what is not in our classical curriculum that is required from the Zambian, the teachers meld them together and make sure that the students are being taught those particular items. My most frequently remembered example is grade 7 Zambia math. You have to be able to do calculations in different base numbers. Base 2, something in base 2 multiplied by something in base 4. That's always on the exam. It matters to the kids so they can go to grade 8. And so our math teacher teaches the classical curriculum and takes a few days to teach that. So yes, it is very top-down driven, but I think it is possible to adapt and meld the two of them. And with our subjects like rhetoric and logic and history, we would categorize those in the same way other schools might categorize swimming lessons or ballet lessons. They're co-curricular. And so far, we've been able to get registered as a private school every year, and by God's grace, our students have been quite successful. So it is not the easiest system, but we recognize the importance in the future lives of our students. Is that okay?
Thank you. We have another question here from the audience. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My question is, does Rafiki and the school in America provide the same kind of education for people with disabilities, like the blind, those that can't see, the deaf? Yeah.
Do you want to, I can talk specifically about Rafiki if you want to talk about, okay, all right, okay.
You're asking a former special ed teacher, so it's a question I have different viewpoints on. I do believe classical education is appropriate for students with disabilities. There's a wonderful book called Simply Classical about students with multiple and severe disabilities who were homeschooled in a very good classical way. And our school here in Zambia, and there's one Rafiki school in America, we can adapt our curriculum for students with milder disabilities, but then you run into issues with ECZ. They have not been adapted for students with visual impairments. We're looking at both the curriculum and the logistics of providing special education. We have in our school one special ed teacher, but we do not have a teacher who could use sign language in every class. We do not have a teacher who is there to translate everything into Braille. So we're not able to provide all of those accommodations. Depending on the school, I know the Rafiki school in Kenya has accommodated some of the buildings for kids with physical disabilities. So theoretically and practically it is possible. Logistically, considering the cost, we would have to charge the parents a lot more in order to hire an additional staff and paraprofessionals. So that's kind of, we do the best we can, making work what we can within our limited resources, I guess.
I can just describe what the schools back home do. The school that my kids have all gone to, Logos School, would have mild disabilities would be accommodated in the classroom, and they would treat them the same as every other student, but then they would give a little bit of extra help outside of class. More severe disabilities that would not be able to work inside of that just wouldn't work at that school. So we've started a second school. It's much smaller, and it's just really for kids with much more severe disabilities. The difficulty is that, as was just mentioned, the cost model is very difficult. So if you have a school with just students with very severe learning disabilities, the number of teachers that you need to make that happen, it becomes very expensive. And so you can't cover it with what we would pay for the normal tuition in the normal school. So that special school that we have started, we basically, as local churches, try to give extra money out of our budget to that school to make that school possible. So there are a lot of, the normal school, just the way parents pay tuition, they can fund the whole thing. Parents can't fund that special school. At least they can't afford enough. And so that's where donors outside, mostly churches, help to support that school and make it work.
I have another question from online, probably for Dr. Merkle first. It says, where does someone who has had 25 plus years of secular / state mandated education start to have a well-rounded Christ-centered education? So how do you get started in a classical education as somebody who wasn't trained that way?
Yeah, actually, I do get that question quite a lot because a lot of people they're older and they suddenly realize they didn't get the education they feel like they should have gotten, and then they feel like, what's the remedial education program? I think the best thing you can do is to start reading. It really is simply that, to be able to figure out that list of books that are the classics and start pushing yourself to read through that, to read as much as you can. The thing that strikes me as most, I don't know, when I look at graduates from NSA, the thing that they all possess is this constant appetite to keep learning. They just keep learning, they keep reading. And I think that that's something you can develop outside of a classical education, but you really just have to become someone who reads, who listens, who is a constant lifelong learner.
Do you have anything to add to that? Okay. Very good. Are there any other? Maurice, I see a question right there.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. My question is, what is the role of students in a classical liberal arts Christian university to ensure that learning happens? Is it the same with any other university or school, or there's some like addition or subtraction?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So is there anything additional, like how do the students themselves, how ought they to behave in a classical Christian environment? Is it different than other universities? Like, what are kind of the things that students themselves have to do?
That's a really good question. I think here are a couple of thoughts. One, and I think I already sort of said this, I think one thing that's really important is that you be pursuing the education because you want it. That it's something you're actually legitimately interested in and that you desire. I think a classical education that you receive simply to pass the test but don't actually have a desire on the inside to learn that way is not profitable and it is not healthy. So I think one of the first things is just that you desire to have that kind of education. Another is that you become that lifelong learner, that you're reading things for class, but you're also interested in reading things, that you are a naturally curious person who wants to continue to learn. I think that's really important. And then another thing that I think is really important is that you be somebody who wants to integrate knowledge. And what I mean by that is that you apply knowledge from one space and one discipline all the way over into another discipline. That if you're interested in agriculture, that you also be curious about economics and also about philosophy and how perhaps economics and philosophy influence agriculture. That you would be interested in, I think it's really interesting that there's actually a whole huge wealth of Latin literature by Romans about farming and farming practices and how you ought to really run your farm. I think it's really interesting when you see somebody who's a farmer who's also interested in figuring out how the ancient world did this and wants to bring it all together. So I think that integration is another piece that can be really, really important.
We have time for a few more questions. I have one here from online as well. I think it's probably directed to Dr. Merkle. Classical education is attractive to many because of its benefits. How do we avoid pride in our pursuit of excellence in education and legitimately seek knowledge for God's glory?
I think that's a really important question because I'm arguing that this education that we're describing here is the best, that this is the thing that you ought to pursue. But as soon as you pursue the best, it's always easy for that to go to your head and for you to start looking around and seeing all the people that you're better than after you've received that education. And so I think it is extremely important that you constantly practice humility. And for me, the way that works is to understand that my salvation is something that God gave me that I didn't earn. that if God had not intervened in my life, I would be a total mess. It was you know, as we're told in Scripture, what do you have that was not actually given to you? Everything you have is a gift. And if it was a gift, why would you boast as if this was something that you had done? That's true of my salvation, but it's also true of everything else that I have. My family, my wife, my kids, my job, everything that I have is something that God gave to me that I've not earned. It's just His grace. And this education, I think it's really important to see in that category that this is God's grace, it's God's gift to us, and not something that we can boast about.
One more question from a student here.
Is the concept of Christian education more geared to homeschooling or communal learning? Or is it something that could go either way?
The what of Christian education?
The concept of Christian education, is it more geared toward homeschooling or in learning together?
Yeah. Thank you. So my family, we homeschooled for several years when we lived in England while I was doing my graduate work. And then we have our kids in a private Christian school back in Moscow. Where I serve as president of the college, I would say half of our kids come from homeschooling families and half of them come from private Christian schools. I see both, and I've seen excellent kids come from homeschooling and excellent kids come from private Christian schools. I've seen kids that did not get a very good education from homeschooling, and I've seen the same thing from private Christian schools. So I don't think that I can say this one is better than that. I think both of them can serve Christian education quite well. The difference between the two, I prefer the private Christian school over homeschooling, and I'll tell you why. First of all, a kid who is an exceptional learner, parents who are homeschooling them can give them more, and they will rise up higher than that same kid in a private school, usually. Because the private Christian school has a whole class, and they want to keep you in that class, whereas parents have one kid, and they'll let him go as far as he can. So he can sometimes go further than he could if he was in a class. On the other hand, I think homeschoolers tend to not do as well with math and science. The kids who are in the private Christian school tend to get better science teachers, and they tend to be pushed in math more, whereas homeschoolers tend to, I would just rather read a book. I don't want to actually have to do science. So there's a little bit of back and forth between homeschooling and private Christian schools. The one big difference to me between the two is not so much in the students, it's in the communities. When you see a community with a private Christian school, the community tends to unite around it, and they tend to grow and thrive in a way that doesn't happen when it's homeschoolers. When you have a community where everybody is homeschooling, what you have are a lot of little families that are focused on themselves, but not outside of themselves. So they tend to not grow as a community. So I think that this is the same. I think that the communities tend to be more healthy when they have schools. But I know plenty of people that they're stuck in a place where homeschooling is just what they need to do, and I don't think that they should feel bad about that at all. I think you can do a great job of homeschooling your kids if that's where you get ended up.
If you have a question, come to the microphone, please. We have time for just a panelists.
My question is, since we all know that every education system, their goal is to provide knowledge. So what do you think is the difference, or what differentiates classical education from other educational systems, and what are the importance? Why would you advise someone to go for classical education and systems?
The difference between a classical and a normal education. why would you encourage the classical approach? Could be for any of you guys.
I could start, but I couldn't finish.
I think your distinctives.
I think that my argument, I'd probably go back to the talk I gave earlier and some of the distinctives of the classical education. I think that I would say the two educations, it's not as if they're both just looking to give knowledge. I think that they are shaping that knowledge in very particular ways. And the classical one tends to be aiming at the core human skills that I was describing in a way that I think is much more effective. I think that when I see the general public education right now, and I'm observing what I see in America, I'm guessing it's probably similar here. But in America, what I see in the public schools is it's more an education for the test. Can you fill out the test and get the right things on the test? Rather than, are you learning to be the kind of person who can think in an intelligent way, who can speak in an intelligent way, who can communicate in an intelligent way. One of the things that I think is that makes the difference between the two is if I give you 10 facts and I say, okay, I need you to repeat those 10 facts back to me. And if you get all 10, you get 100. If you get 9 out of the 10, then you get a 90. If you get 8 out of the 10, you get an 80, and on and on. You can see how that's the kind of test that's quite easy to grade. It's a really easy to grade test. But if I say, I want you to read this book, and I want you to come back and give me an intelligent argument that you would have with that author. And I want you to write 5 pages on that, but you need to make it an intelligent, insightful, and creative, original piece of your thought responding to that author. That's a much more difficult task for you to do. It's also a much more difficult task for me to grade. It takes a lot of work to grade a thoughtful essay. It takes a lot of work to write it. What happens is that teachers oftentimes prefer the assessment method that is very simple, that can be done with a quick little multiple choice test. The other kind of assessment takes a lot more work from the teacher. And what I'm seeing in a lot of the public school work is that a lot of the assignments become increasingly, I'm going to give you 10 facts, you memorize them and see if you can say them back to me. You haven't actually been educated by that. You've learned very little. We all know that by tomorrow you will have forgotten those facts. And so what was the point of you memorizing them? Okay? But if I teach you how to think intelligently, how to argue, I have given you something that will stick with you for life. The difficulty is it's going to take a lot more work out of me. And I think that the classical method tends to lean towards assignments that are going to take more out of the teacher, but really result in actual learning on your behalf, rather than you just regurgitating facts that you were taught yesterday.
Well, I know there's probably a lot more questions. I've got a couple more in here, but we just don't have time for them this afternoon. But I'm sure our panelists will be available to answer some of those questions for a few minutes after. And I know we have them around for a few more days. So if you want to seek them out and ask those questions, we want to continue this conversation and keep these discussions going so that we can continue to grow in our understanding of this topic. As we transition to the next phase, I'm going to call up Mr. Tembo to close out our time for this evening, for this afternoon, and to present our speaker with a gift.
Yeah, when I was growing up, it was rare to have rice with chicken, so to say. And when you had such a meal, we tended not to wash our mouth because we still wanted to retain the taste of the food in our mouth. But the good thing also is that once the food has gone into the tummy and is processed, it contributed to your growth. And I would like to believe that this has been our experience. And I can tell you, as SCU, the two concepts that you have been pursuing this afternoon, because I missed some of them because of some office work, but there was the issue of the biblical worldview, and right now we've been talking about the classical Christian education. I'd like to tell our visitors and our presenters, Dr. Merkle and our colleagues from Rafiki, that SCU is preparing a course in teaching methodology for, Zambian teachers. And we are hoping that by the end of this year, we should have that program, that course presented to the Higher Education Authority so that we can now implement what we believe is good for the Zambian student, where we are able to think through, process information, and appreciate that information and do something about that information. So we are truly, truly grateful. Some acknowledgements that I need to make on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Toby Jennings. He really wanted to be here. And he actually told me, could you communicate to Dr. Merkle that we are truly grateful that you came. And indeed, you have given us this information, and as I've indicated, we value it, and once we prepare this particular program, we will let you see it, so that you can, in a way, look at it and participate and be part of what is happening here. I do not think that Dr. Jennings knew that we're going to have friends from Rafiki coming through. I will tell him, so that he can actually say, oh, they were there, please tell them thank you very much. Because I think he would like to express that gratitude. Let me acknowledge those that were with us during this period. Lou Road School, Family Legacy Academy Department, African Vision of Hope, Christian Vision Global, Eagles Nest School, and then we have a dear brother, Joseph Gage. I may not pronounce his name correctly, but he was with us. We are happy you came, right? I've said much, and I know we still have another meeting with you, Dr. Merkle. And yeah, so let me just get to the presentation of gifts as a way of really expressing our gratitude to you, those that have been with us. Dr. Rose Allinder, if I don't pronounce your name correctly, don't blame me, I come from Betauke. Please.
Wow, thank you, thank you.
Zambia for long. Teacher Rose,
Yes.
thank you. Teacher Rose, that we are grateful. I have Mr. Tom, now the surname, Maggio, yeah. Thank you so much. And Yan said something naughty about him. He's actually my son-in-law.
Yeah.
Then, of course, Dr.Ben Merkle, together with your wife. Thank you. I think at this point then, I won't say much other than say on behalf of the board, African Christian University, on behalf of management, and indeed all the heads of departments, we are grateful that you came and you made these presentations. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for coming. We'll close in a word of prayer this afternoon. Father, we come before you thankful for this opportunity that we've had. We thank you that we got to hear from these individuals today. Thank you for the whole week that we've had. Pray that these ideas, concepts, and truths would sink deep in our souls, and that we would apply them here at ACU as students, as staff, as faculty members. We thank you for the opportunity to hear your word spoken and truth about these ideas. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Just a quick announcement for the students, please remain behind. We just need to rearrange things in the hall. Thank you. And a reminder about the table talk at LBC. Buses arriving at 17:30.